Okay, so it is the top of the hour, and we can go ahead and get things started from here. My name is Ben Dimmick. For those of you who haven't worked with me in the past, I know a number of you here on the broadcast. I've worked with you previously and been out to your offices. My role here at Tevora, I lead up our solutions practice. So that is inclusive of a large portion of our implementation services, as well as I work pretty extensively with a lot of our folks during our pre-sales processes from a technical aspect. So in a lot of cases, that gives me the chance to really get my hands dirty on these solutions, as well as talk to people ahead of time and find out what their needs are, and then make sure that what we're delivering to them is the right solution for it. And what we've seen more and more frequently lately has been a lot of our clients expressing interest in security automation. And we really just wanted to have this as a session to sit down and get some information out there in terms of clearing up some of the questions and some of the confusion that sometimes exists around this space. It's a relatively new endeavor for security, or rather, it's just been much more of a focus in the last, I'd say, last 2 years or so, in terms of getting exposure and really building out platforms to handle security automation orchestration. So let me first dive in a little bit, and I should mention, I realize everybody's kind of coming in from different experience levels and different places. So we're going to try to cover as much of the common ground as possible, and try to get as much information really out there for people at different levels as possible. But as we go through, if you have any questions, feel free to fill out the question box there that should be available for you. I'm planning to get questions addressed at the end, but feel free to fill them out as we go. So let me just go ahead and dive in first and explain a couple of things. This is kind of a new space. There's a little bit of questions around terms and some of the vernacular that kind of gets thrown out there. One of the things that we see pretty frequently is, for instance, people asking, okay, well, security, automation, and orchestration tend to get lumped in together. And really, there's been a lot of questions in terms of why. But security automation at its whole really has to do with coming down and having the system perform tasks for us. We're looking to automate some of these tasks that were previously very much human-focused tasks, things that we would have required an analyst in a SOC or a help desk or what have you to really sit down and have to review manually and then get addressed. And the whole idea behind automation is to take some of those repetitive tasks and get them automated, so that we have to spend less human effort to accomplish the same level of success. The second definition here is security orchestration, and essentially what this comes down to is trying to make it simpler to get people working together on these same shared tasks that we're really focused on. So what we're looking for here is again, we're imagine our SOC here for a minute. We have our analyst who's gotten an alert. He's working through a task. Maybe this alert happened to come in the last half hour of his shift, and so at the end of his shift, well, what does he do? Does he take his notes and give them to the next guy that's coming on? Does he bundle all it up and say, you know, this alert can probably wait 16 hours until I come back in tomorrow? So the whole idea behind orchestration is making it easier for different individuals to get on the same page. This way, when one analyst leaves, another analyst comes in, the next analyst doesn't have to start all over in terms of going back and gathering the information that the first one did. So that's what orchestration comes down to, is primarily gathering in all the information that we're finding about an incident, so that we can make it easier to follow it and take follow-up action as a result. And the third one that is starting to show up more frequently is this acronym called SOAP. And what this is a reference to is Security Orchestration and Automation Platform. The idea here is that a lot of these solutions that are showing up out there are really focused on turning this into a platform, because it's really not a matter of just go stand up a box, put it in place, and you're done. That box really has to be able to interface with a number of other solutions and systems within the enterprise in order for it to be effective. So we're starting to see these being viewed as platforms as opposed to just solutions themselves. So just to get a couple of terms out there in terms of when we're discussing automation versus orchestration, that's what we're referring to. In the broad sense, throughout most of this presentation, I'm going to refer to everything as automation. But for the most part, what applies to automation can also apply to orchestration. And we found that there's really very few folks out there that are really interested in orchestration, but not automation exclusively. But as you are talking to vendors about different options that are out there, just be aware that if they're focused very heavily on orchestration as opposed to automation, then that may be what they're looking at is more about detailed collaboration in terms of how events are handled and so on. So just word for the wise there. Stepping into a little bit more in terms of why we automate. The general goals overall is that we're looking to accomplish more. Just about everybody in security has open recs. I seem to recall hearing that in security we have something like some ridiculous amount of negative unemployment right now, where there's simply just not enough security professionals out there in order to do all the work that needs to be done. And for most organizations, if they could find the people, they wouldn't necessarily be able to afford the entire headcount that they need in order to accomplish their tasks. And so that's one of the biggest reasons that we're starting to see automation becoming popular. We're starting to see it as a cure to a lot of these challenges that are showing up over time in terms of how do we get everything done within the amount of time that we actually have available in the day. Another big push for this is to be able to complete stuff quicker. Again, going back to our SOC example before, we might have an analyst sitting there working on a problem for 2 hours, and there's a long list of tasks that he needs to run through. He needs to go look up the IP of the system that might have raised the flag internally, and he needs to find out who that system is assigned to, and he needs to find out what department that person is a part of, so that he can figure out why they might have triggered this event. I mean, there's a long list of steps that need to be followed here, and essentially it's really a lot of tasks. There's a lot of repetitive motion that goes through with most of these alerts that come in. So that can make things a whole lot faster if we can come up with ways to automate it instead of having to spend 2 hours going through and gathering all the information regarding this event so that we can then make a decision. We can automate some of that, so we are able to make a decision much more quickly. Additionally, once we start really having the system take automated responses to these types of triggers, that response is much quicker as well. Instead of having to, for instance, if you don't have a 24-hour SOC, or your security team is really just a 9-to-5 operation, then any alerts that come in off hours, let's say an alert pops up at 6 p.m., everybody's already left the office, well, there's a very reasonable chance that no one is going to look at that until 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. the next morning. And so by automating some of this, we can get round-the-clock coverage and really get these things nailed down a whole lot faster. Another big thing is that as we start to remove some of the human element from these equations, then we can oftentimes get improved accuracy. Now, there is always a bit of a caveat to this, because essentially anything that the humans have to sit down and design how this is going to work first. And so if we've made mistakes at that stage, then you're obviously opening yourselves up to new issues there. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what we're starting to see is that once these tasks and these processes and these playbooks are really dialed in, we're starting to see that the accuracy of how these events are getting handled is becoming much better. we're not running into these issues where a human transposes a number and suddenly we're now looking at an IP that came from Russia as opposed to one that came from down the hall. So there's a number of different accuracy elements to this as well that have improved with automation as we started to get those refined there. One of the things that comes up frequently as well is what is this going to look like? What is automation really going to do for us in the end? And so what we're looking at here is types of things that we frequently see automated. So the good news to this is that we actually are able to remove an awful lot of the stuff that is time consuming, especially for a proactive organization. This isn't all going to be, or rather I should say, automation really doesn't focus on some of the tasks that are time consuming for a lot of security professionals still. For instance, we're on this list here, you're not seeing anything about for instance applying security patches or getting systems up to speed, or applying system hardening, things like that. System hardening could be one component in here, but we're finding that most systems, or most organizations rather, there's already systems in place to ensure automated hardening is taking place. So instead, what we're starting to see is more of the repetitive tasks is what we're tending to focus on here. This is things like, for instance, an IPS alert comes in. What are we going to do? Maybe it's as simple as we just had some IP in China just create an alert on our IPS. We don't know who this person is, but we don't do any business in China, so we would rather just ban this IP. So things like that is a pretty common use case for automation. User self-service as well is another important one. I would say one of the more common scenarios that we see automation platforms demonstrating is actually having a mailbox that users can send email to allow for those emails to be reviewed for malicious content. The scenario here would be something along the lines of a user receives an email. They think it may be a malicious email. They think it may be a phishing attack. They think there may be some suspicious attachments here. And in most organizations, what do? Well, they send it to the help desk, which means that now we have another ticket that gets opened. It goes into a queue somewhere. Hopefully someone doesn't just decide to start clicking on links because they don't know what they're doing within the help desk. So we're really not isolating that message. We're just putting it into another queue. And again, I would imagine most proactive organizations don't really have time to sit there and go through the entire queue that comes up. In most cases, it's a matter of you get the message, you say, you give it a 2-minute glance or a 30-second once over, and you say, yeah, this looks suspicious, don't open it, or no, this probably looks fine. You're probably okay. Well, let me send this attachment off to be analyzed in the sandbox or whatever. But instead, what we're able to do is send that data to a specific mailbox, which then takes it and does all analysis for you. We can take the attachments, send their hashes through VirusTotal, or send the attachments themselves through a malware sandboxing solution that we may have in place. We can have the links analyzed with any of the threat intelligence that we have. Again, we can use VirusTotal for a lot of that stuff. We can use a number of different threat feeds to find out what the risk level is that we're seeing from what is inside this email. Or even look for a lot of the more common factors there, such as it was coming from a domain that it was sent from a domain that it doesn't appear to actually be a part of, all of the header details, things like that. So that's another pretty useful tool in terms of getting users a quicker response and offloading a lot of those help desk tickets that happen to come in. Information gathering and hunting. A lot of this too goes back to those repetitive tasks that I mentioned at the beginning of this slide. So This would be, for instance, we get an alert that comes up on our IPS. We are curious about what this is. Well, we need to find out a few things. We need to go find out some details on how this alert got generated. For instance, was this one of our software engineers that happened to generate this alert, or does this alert happen to come from our CEO? Is this coming from accounting, or is this coming from our guest Wi-Fi network? There's generally a lot of different steps that have to be gone through in order to make an intelligent decision about whether or not an alert is positively an attack, or it's a false positive. Maybe we also want to find out, where is this IP coming from? Is this coming from potentially a partner or a client of ours, or is this an attack coming from some random IP address in Brazil somewhere? So the idea behind it is that once we start getting some of these alerts, we can automate the entire information gathering phase. And so suddenly, instead of our SOC analyst or our security engineer having to spend the next half hour to 2 hours going and logging into 18 different consoles to pull down information on this attack and gather all of the background information that they need in terms of how it was launched, who it was launched against, things like that. Instead, they can get all that information in one report and then be able to make a decision on that process immediately. So there's a lot of saved efficiency by implementing the information gathering that's a part of this. And then the last thing is essentially comes down to the progressive processes that we have within the organization. That's one of the big things about automation, is that it doesn't have to necessarily be an all or nothing proposition. So what I mean by that is we can dig in much deeper to some of our decisioning and what these things ultimately look like in the long run. We can look at it and say, okay, at what point are you making a decision? Do we need to get more eyes on these alerts as they come up? What type of challenges are there? And by putting in a repeated and fully observed process with an automation platform, we can quickly start to see what's really happening here and how this process is breaking down and where it's being successful. And that kind of takes me over to our next step, which is what automation is really doing at the end of the day. And I think I've covered this a decent amount already, but just to give a little more detail, one of the first things is we're essentially just getting a lot easier triage on a lot of alerts that come in. This is one of the biggest challenges that we see in a lot of organizations, is with all the various things that are out there, trying to figure out the right level of alerts to receive. Not all organizations are necessarily going to have the same appropriate levels in terms of what they should get alerts on. And one of the most important factors that we've seen in terms of tuning is actually your organization's ability to respond to those alerts as they come in. And by that I mean, for instance, if you have, well, let's say we have 2 security engineers for the entire organization, and you have a DLP system in place, you have an IPS system in place, you have a user behavioral analytics system in place, you have 10 different systems set up that are all sending alerts. Well, if each of those alerts is going to take a half an hour to investigate and respond to, and you're getting 2 alerts a day from each of those systems, then frankly you're now looking at 10 man hours just to review and respond to alerts, and that doesn't take into account everything else that's going on. So by taking a lot of the load off of how long it takes to respond to some of these alerts, then it makes it much easier to get these systems tuned to ensure that we're getting the right level of alerting coming through. For instance, we can pretty quickly start to be able to make decisions on these things faster, and have to have a lower threshold of what we assume is a false positive, because we don't necessarily have the time to respond to all of them. Another important thing is the indicators of compromise hunting. For instance, oftentimes during an attack, it's or rather, especially during a successful compromise, there is usually several different steps that take place before we are actually alerted that something has happened. For instance, somebody gets a phishing email. It's a common way for things to start. They get an attachment in that email. There's a link that they've clicked on. They've done something in order to get themselves affected by this attacker. The attacker then pivots to another system, and so on and so forth. And frequently, it's not until that third or fourth system has been compromised and something has happened that's really triggered our attention and got us thinking about what might be happening. And this is the details that we've gotten from reviewing numerous breach reports that are out there, as well as by working with our incident response team here at Tevora in terms of how these things work out. So that's one of the big things here, is that suddenly we can start to use these types of platforms to begin finding out about other types of issues quicker. So instead of needing to say, for instance, we've had a malware alert go off. This is the MD5 hash. Okay, that would be more of a traditional alert, and that's pretty crucial. And it's good to get those first early warnings out the door. But the question always comes up. Okay, well, what is that thing? Well, maybe what we want to know is this a file that is common? Maybe what we need to find out is this a file that is unique to these systems? Is this a file that exists on 5 systems or 10 systems or every system? Maybe what we find out is that this MD5 hash that happened to pop up for us isn't actually malware, but is instead just part of our CRM, or it's part of our document management system, or what have you. And because it's kind of a proprietary system, it wouldn't necessarily show up in some of those widely known databases such as VirusTotal. So we can pretty quickly start to gather a lot more information very, very fast. We can instead go back to our automation platform, and we can say, go find out who else has this. Find out where else this hash is present, when else we have seen this hash, and it can query all the other systems that you happen to have in place and help to bring that information in. And that can all get joined back to your same incident in a pretty fast way. Another thing is the indicators of attack response. This is similar to the whole alert triaging process, but one of the most important things about this is that it allows us to begin taking that initial response right away. So, for instance, if we have an alert that goes off that says we found that there is some malware that's coming from this particular website, okay, great. With a lot of our traditional systems, let's say, for instance, you have a next-gen firewall. It has detected that there is malware. That firewall will now start blocking that particular malware in the future. Terrific. That's great. But maybe we need to do more. Maybe we need to find out more about what is happening. And that kind of takes us to our fourth step as well in terms of isolation. Is, for instance, we can then take that information and say, who else has ever gone to that website that had this malware hosted on it? What other systems are potentially compromised within our environment? So we can pull the data from our web logs. We can pull the data from our firewall logs. We can pull all of that data together, and we can start to paint a picture. We can then start pulling into our endpoint solution and say, this is a hash of a bad file. What is on this system, or what changes have been made, or what files have been changed on the system in the last few hours. We can even set up the system to say, go isolate this system from the network. We'll tie into one of our other systems and immediately get that host isolated until additional investigation can be completed on it, and it can be given a clean bill of health. So essentially, whatever we would have our humans doing in the SOC, we can have our systems do here by integrating all of the various machines that we have in our enterprise together in order to get the whole picture together. So that's definitely one of the things that we're starting to see automation showing up for more and more frequently in terms of what our ultimate goals are. Again, another example that we see frequently with a lot of our playbooks is we see one server that happens to have malware on it. We want to immediately log into our VMware console and take a snapshot of all of our servers, because the thought is, if we discover that another server subsequently gets infected, then we want to be able to roll everything back to this point right now, and get up and running again. So we can take a lot more timely responses with automation and get a faster response to what's really happening by automating these things with the automation platform. Now, let me get in a little bit more now to what we're actually seeing out there and what's really starting to work. For instance, the organizations that we're seeing that are automating successfully, let me kind of walk you through what their processes look like. And there's generally a few steps here. Again, this is definitely not an endeavor where the approach to automating successfully is just slap in a box, give it credentials on a couple of systems, and then go take an early lunch. There's generally a decent amount of phase zero work that takes place before we really get into it. And by phase zero, I mean stuff that activities that are completed before we really even start to install any new systems or hardware or software really within the enterprise. So the first thing we're starting to see is that we need to formalize our procedures much better. We're starting to see that there's a lot of very ad hoc processes that are out there for most of our clients, especially the ones that are feeling fairly overwhelmed in terms of manpower. When for instance, we ask the SOC analysts what their processes are in order to respond to these alerts that they get, we usually get a little bit of a deer in the headlights response back, and we found that it's difficult right away for them to say, I follow step A and then step B and then step C and then I'm done. Because ultimately, when we're getting ready to automate, that's what we need to know, is what are steps A, B, and C along the way. And I'll get a little more detail on this process in just a second. But the other thing is, as well, is that automation, when it's successful, generally will be in a multi-phased approach. And by this I mean the first step is usually around gathering in all of our information. We want to be able to find out exactly what's happening with all of the alerts that are out there. We need to be able to get all the information from our hosts that are out there. Again, finding out which users these are, what website did this alert pop up from, things like that. And then because ultimately that data enrichment is the process that our users are going to go through in order to make their informed decisions about what to do regarding this particular alert. And usually, once we've gotten through that, then our last phase is really to begin adding in remediation. And this is where a lot of folks, I think, want to go immediately with automation, because you definitely save some time during the data enrichment phase, but the remediation phase is where we really start to see incidents occurring where the issue is detected and resolved virtually in real time. And then a human just needs to come in later on and review the process and make sure that everything is all set and ready to go. So that's usually where a lot of folks are anxious to get to almost immediately, but it's kind of a journey along the way when we've seen it be successful in the past. So let me step through each of these individually a little bit. I'll give you a little more background on kind of what I'm discussing there. So in terms of formalizing procedures, the biggest thing usually is that we need to define what the use cases are. We need to define, for instance, what type of things are you responding to? Because most organizations, when we walk in, they say, we want to start automating everything. We say, great. What types of things are you looking to automate? Security events. Okay, good. We're starting to get somewhere. But then the question is always, how are you finding out about security events? The fact of the matter is that almost everything in automation and almost everything that occurs in the SOC is going to start with some type of an alert. You're going to get an email that's going to pop up from your IPS. You're going to get a ticket that's going to show up in Jira or Remedy or whatever that's going to say we've had a DLP violation from this user. You're going to have something that's going to trigger that's going to cause you to decide to go out and start work on an issue. And it's very rarely that you're really sitting down and reading through the logs and all of a sudden go, oh, this looks bad. And if you do start to find those issues, then generally what we're doing is we're creating new alerts in the future to find out about those anyways. So it's usually what we're starting from is we're saying, let's find out what your alerts are. Where are they coming from? What do they look like? What is your starting point? So that's generally step one. Step two, we're looking to really figure out what the process is that the SOC is going through once they are getting those alerts. And again, I can say that I've done this enough times that the response that we usually get most often is, well, I have to review it and then figure it out. We found that most of the folks in most SOCs don't quite have a mature enough process to be able to say I start with these 10 steps and this is the process I look through. But that's really what we want to get to, is to understand what the whole process is. What are the decisioning factors that are involved? We ultimately want to get away from gut feel. And we want to start factoring in a lot more cold logic around how we determine what looks fishy and what looks safe after all. So that's a big part of this, is really just sitting down and going through the process. I personally, when I need to go through this step, I will usually sit down with a few different SOC analysts, and I will say, let's pull up an alert. Let's go look at some of these alerts that you've gotten in the past and walk me through your exact process. So I can see, for instance, on this ticket, you said that this was a false positive. Walk me through all of the steps that you needed to go through in terms of gathering information and what the factors were that you were able to see from that information that caused you to believe that this was a false positive. And then the third step, sitting down and just documenting that particular process. One of the challenges is that, again, every person in the SOC is probably going to have a slightly different process that they happen to go through. One guy may say, I look at the IP reputation behind this stuff. I pull up the IP on VirusTotal and on our threat feeds, and I figure out if it's been known for anything bad. The other guy may say, I never get anything from that, so I never bother. I've always found it's not very useful. And so you're going to find that in most organizations, they're not going to have a very unified process, and that's going to be a big part of this. Is really just sitting down and creating something that is in writing that shows what this process is going to be, and have everybody kind of agree to it at a high level. Again, even the guy that says that I found that these steps aren't really useful, we need to have them at least agree that there may be value to those steps. And in most cases, especially when we're going to automate it, it's really not increasing the workload for that individual. And so most people are able to say, yeah, fine, we may get some information from it in the future, so sure, we can go ahead and include it. Or we may have some people that say, I found that information is widely inaccurate, and so it's never been very useful for me, so I'd rather remove it from the equation. And generally, at the end of the day, somebody needs to make a decision on what these processes are going to look like in the end. The fourth step, once we've finally gotten everything documented, everybody knows what the processes are going to be, then we will generally start having people execute based on that script. And what I'm talking about there is, for instance, I'll generally start with some type of like a flow chart, a step-by-step procedure, something along those lines. And then the next time that an alert of that type comes in, we will get everybody we'll get whoever is assigned to that task in the SOC to follow this procedure on a step-by-step basis. And the goal here is that we're looking for any gaps that may come up in our knowledge and in that particular process. Any other steps that need to be conducted in order to make a decision, or any other factors in that decisioning process that were not considered previously. So the reason for that is because there's almost always things that get forgotten during the first pass, and so we generally do a couple of passes just to make sure that we've kind of got everything in there. This is also the point where we can start actually doing some of the automated information gathering. The goal there being that if we at this point we can start picking up some of the slack in terms of the execution of this data gathering exercise. And if we have our automation platform in place, we have our integrations done at this point, then we can start having the system do some of this discovery, turn all this information over to the user, and then say, we think that based on the analysis that was done, that this was the action that should have been taken at the end. And your SOC analyst can say either, yes, that's accurate, or no, that's not accurate, or there was some information there's some additional information that we should get in order to complete this analysis. So that's the overall idea there, is just trying to find out any type of issues that may come up. And then the last step is where this process starts to become iterative, and that's that we need to go back and reevaluate the whole procedure after it's been executed a couple of times to figure out what went wrong, how else could this process be improved, and so on and so forth. So essentially what this whole process is involved in is going from the analog, heavily human dependent format that our current response procedures are generally starting in, and usually what they're at, what they'll be at present day, and taking them instead to a much more prescriptive process that the computer can begin to understand and begin to execute on. It also makes it easier for outsiders to execute on it as well. But I'm going to go back one slide for 1 second. So that is our formalizing procedures process. From there, that's really start to really automate data enrichment and even go into remediation. So let me take you ahead and kind of give you a little bit of a diagram on how that starts to work out. Hopefully this text isn't too hard to read. I realized after I put the slide together that text might be just a little bit small, but let me go ahead and kind of walk you through it. This is kind of a simple flow of how some of these processes can go. And the items that are in green, those diamonds there, those are the decisioning points and some of the information gathering points. And the ones that are in blue are the actions that might be taken. So, for instance, we'll start out with this network-based IPS alert. Very simple alert, very common for most organizations. Next, what we say is the attacker using a known IP address. So in this case, what we're having to do is we're having to provide a list of IP addresses or subnets or what have you that we know what they are. So in this example, there's two types of IP addresses that we have in this flow. The first one is our internal IP addresses. So in this case, we know what our internal subnets are. We'll say that there are 192.168.1 addresses. We only have one C class in our organization for some reason. So we're able to make a decision immediately on what this is. If this is an attacker that's coming from someplace inside that we know, then we want to begin isolating this particular host. So this is kind of how our decisioning process starts to work. At this point, we're starting to leave data enrichment, and we're starting to go towards remediation. But I'll stick to just the data enrichment here for just a minute. So the next step would be, we instead say, no, this is not an internal IP address. And then we say, is this on the list of IPs from our partners? Perhaps we have some partner relationships where they have a VPN connection into our internal network, or even they just happen to come from the outside and connect to our external systems. If the answer is yes, then we'll want to take one action. If the answer is no, then we know that this is not a host that we're particularly curious about, And at that point, we now know that we really know very little about this IP. And so we're going to go through the whole data enrichment process. And this is kind of encapsulated right now because what that process looks like is very different for every organization. And when I say very different, I mean, for instance, a lot of organizations, they will have a lot of different tools in place. Maybe they want to send this through 3 or 4 different threat feeds. Maybe they want to, maybe they're really worried about the geolocation that this data comes from, or other organizations say we do business everywhere in the world, so the geolocation doesn't matter. But the long and the short of it is that this process is pretty personal to the organization and will vary quite a bit. But at the end of the day, what we're looking to do is to figure out what the determinations are that we are looking for, and then figure out how to handle those accordingly. So that's kind of what our data enrichment looks like, is basically getting to the point where we have this more detailed report, instead of just saying your basic IPS alert is going to look something to the effect of, this was the source IP, this was the destination IP, this was the source and destination ports, this was the attack that occurred. That's what your basic IPS alert is going to look like. Instead, we're looking here to get, this was our source IP, this is our destination IP, this is the username of the user that was logged into that system when that alert took place. This is the website that they happen to be visiting, which, by the way, resolves to the IP address that attack came from. Things like that. We were able to get a much clearer picture in terms of what actually happened, as opposed to just that very narrow margin of time when the alert criteria happened to go off. So coming back over here now to the diagram, looking at the remediation phase, we can see, for instance, in this case, what we would say is that if the IP is an internal IP address, then we want to launch our process, which will isolate that host from the network. Maybe, for instance, we happen to have a NAC solution internally. Great, let's throw them onto the potential malware host subnet and get all these folks isolated so they can't infect anyone else in the network. And then from there, we need to start investigating that isolated host to see if they are a potential pivot point for an attacker to attack other hosts within the enterprise. So in this case, if our attacker was actually physically at that system, then they would lose their network access, and then we would have to go and investigate that issue and get that confirmed and get that addressed. If they were not, if they were just using that system as a jump-off point for the rest of their attacks, then again, by isolating that host, we've now removed their access to that system, and there probably needs to be some additional investigation put into place if in case they had come from another system internally, or if that was patient 0 in this case, or what have you. Going back over here, for instance, we determined in this organization that if the IP was coming from a partner of the organization, then they needed to notify the partner that had occurred. And there's in this case, there was an automated email message that was generated and sent to that partner, whoever the contact was that was listed. And then they went ahead and blocked the IP address of that partner, or rather the IP address of this alert came from, and notified them that they can contact the security office of this particular company in order to get this issue resolved. And then down here as well, coming from our IP enrichment process, one of the things that came out of that is that they actually were generating a full score based on the risk that was associated with that IP address. For instance, if in this case the scoring, if it came out to greater than 75, and that was based on the risk metrics that were applied by a few different threat feeds that were out there. It was based on risk metrics comparing historical traffic from this IP address in the past. For instance, if we see this IP address on a frequent basis, and it's done, we've had 1,000 different legitimate transactions with this IP address, and then we had this one that happened to trigger it, then that would lower the score because that would appear more like a legitimate customer that happened to trigger a false positive. Anyways, all of these factors went into it, and if the score was passing a certain threshold, then they would again block that IP. Otherwise, they would just log the incident into a system to be reviewed by a human engineer, which could then go and take action on that event. So, in a whole, that's kind of how the data enrichment processes and remediation processes tend to flow overall. Excuse me. A few things that we've learned by going through this process with a couple of clients already is that number one, automation does require a decent amount of building, and by this I mean it's still kind of a new enterprise. For any of you on the line that have worked with Elasticsearch in the past, or worked with Splunk back in the early days of Splunk, you'll probably know what I mean by this, and that's that there's still a lot of integrations that need to get built out, or functionality that isn't completely finished with this particular solution that we want to interface with. For instance, maybe we want to connect to our next-gen firewall through our automation platform and upload some new MD5 hashes that we want to be on the lookout for and begin blocking. But the integration doesn't currently have that functionality, so we need to extend that integration. So definitely need to be prepared to be comfortable with writing a little bit of code. Python is a pretty common language for most of these platforms, because that's a pretty common language for most of the users that are out there. We've seen some JavaScript and some Java and a couple other things as well, but there's frequently a little bit of, well, or should I say initially during the onset, there's a little bit of code that needs to get written. So if your organization is completely opposed to writing code, or you don't really have anybody that's real comfortable with it, then I would say that it's definitely crucial to make sure that we're bringing in an outside resource that can do that. And that's a large part of what the guys on my team are focused on, is on doing some of this deep coding exercise and getting some of these deeper integrations into place. The second thing is really getting a complete picture. One of the challenges that comes up here a lot of the time is that we'll start digging into a process, and we'll find out that we don't quite have all of the tools that we need, or we want to gather a certain amount of information or to make a decision, but turns out we don't have tools that will do that. We need to go back and come up with some way to complete that particular process. And for some organizations, they're doing it manually now, and for others, they just want to be able to do it and haven't been able to make good decisions up to this point around that. So that's a big part of this as well. Look, during the onset, when we're looking at what our whole process is, we need to look at what other solutions and applications do we need to worry about getting into place, so that we can make sure that this is successful overall. Another thing is that if you're doing automation, I would highly recommend planning for a phased approach. And as I mentioned before, excuse me, the process will generally start out with that phase 0 work, where we're looking down, discovering what all the processes are. For most folks, if we want to go from having nothing to being completed, yeah, that's going to take quite a bit of time. We have to go back and develop all those processes. We have to go back and add in all of our data discovery and enrichment, and then we have to build all our decisioning on top of that. And so for most folks, what we're looking at instead is doing a phased approach that allows us to have some very specific milestones along the way. Milestone 1 is getting all of that phase 0 stuff out of the way. Milestone 2 would be performing data enrichment. And maybe it's not even data enrichment across the board. Maybe it starts out as data enrichment for these 5 types of alerts that we are getting, and then built out from there. So that tends to be a big factor. Is just how the organization tends to roll things out and get value from that stage. So that brings me to the conclusion of my content here, and I can open the floor up to you guys for any questions that might exist. Let me also open up. Okay, great. So let me see here. Okay, so I have one question. Who are the players in the automation space right now? So, in terms of who is out there that's doing automation, there is an awful lot of folks that are out there right now. It's a pretty interesting space, and it's developing pretty quickly. For instance, one of the ones that most folks have heard of is Phantom Cyber. They won the RSA Innovation Award. I think it was 2 years ago, and so they got a lot of attention there, and a lot of folks have heard of them. But they're one of the first names that come up. Another one that is very similar to Demisto, or excuse me, to Phantom is Demisto. Their platform is very similar to Phantom's, but one thing I would say that they differ on a little bit is that Demisto is a little more focused on the orchestration piece in addition to the automation side of things, whereas Phantom is focused much more on getting a wide practice in place in terms of what they're able to integrate with and who they're able to work with off the bat. It seems like their goal is kind of to get to the same point that Splunk got with their Splunk apps. So that's kind of what they're focused on very heavily, is getting a lot of integrations into place. Let's see here. What types of tools are commonly needed during automation? So we've got a few things that have kind of popped up for a lot of folks. I would say the two things that seem to pop out most frequently are EDR, and by that I mean just trying to get all the visibility that they need on the endpoint in terms of being able to find out, for instance, what commands were launched in order to get to this point. Is this hash currently present on any other systems? Things like that. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest ones. I'd say the second one is that we usually see threat feeds start to pop up a lot more at that point. Frequently, a lot of organizations don't necessarily know where to go with threat feeds before they really start automating, and so that's really kind of the point where it starts to become really useful to them all of a sudden, where they can say, okay, has anybody else identified this as a potential bad host out there? What's really happening with it? So yeah, that's where when threat feeds start to really show up to become a lot more popular there. Any other questions? Looks like that's what I have so far. Okay, perfect. Well, I think that is it then. So great. I want to thank you all for attending. We'll have a recording of this available in case there was anyone on your team that would have liked to have reviewed this and didn't get a chance. And we'll be sending that out as a follow-up after this meeting. But so thanks so much. Appreciate everybody who jumped on. Hope you have a great day.